Hi, this is Elisabeth Hancock, host of the Great Awakening podcast, and welcome to this week's episode where we're going to be looking at the Rh negative bloodline. It is a fascinating blood type, and no one knows where it's come from. It predates humans, and it's one of those ones where many people believe that there's an off-planet element to it. And after you've listened to today's episode, maybe you will feel the same. So the Rh negative blood type is fascinating. So fascinating, in fact, that I talk about it quite a lot in my new book, which is Human Origins, the Multiverse and Our Star Ancestry. Because my belief is that this blood type is not only an off-planet blood type, showing that we are hybrids ourselves, but there used to be a lot more Rh negative people in the world. And now there are hardly any. Maybe even 50% of the population were Rh negative, because we can see in the Basque region today, this houses the most amount of Rh negative people, and in some areas they have more than 50% of their population. We'll come back to this in a bit, but first of all, I just wanted to mention that Rh negative blood type is a universal donor blood and can be given to anyone. But if an Rh positive blood is given to an Rh negative person, then they could die. This universal link reminds me of something that Dr. Gary Nolan discovered, which is that human DNA can be traced back 9 billion years. As our planet is only 4.5 billion years old, this tells us that not only do we not come from here, that our DNA, human DNA, has not originated from here, but it also tells us that humans have been around for billions of years. In fact, in the Indian Vedas, it does actually say that there are 400,000 humanoid species just in our galaxy alone. Again, pointing to the fact that human DNA did not originate here, it came from somewhere else and was either brought here or it was seeded here. The theory of panspermia looks at the seeding of other species onto other planets, onto different planets. And this is an area which is very persuasive, and as more and more scientists are beginning to think that panspermia is how life ended up on our planet. Certainly, there are many more beginning to believe that it's not the Darwin's explanation of how it got here. So let's go back to the Rh negative blood type, and I'm just going to run through 10 interesting facts about it, which I discovered on my own research. Number one is that the Rh negative blood goes further back than the human race does, which means it predates us. This is incredible. It means it's older than Homo sapien, which possibly isn't that hard because we're only 200,000 or 300,000 years old as it is, but it means that it predates that. Number two, the Rh negative blood type is not fully compatible with the Rh positive blood type, which shows that it is a different species to Homo sapien. This is not so incredible because we've had many different species on this planet, Denisovian, Neanderthal. They were sister species to us, not the same as the Homo sapien species. And there have also been other parts of the world where we can see that there are ghost ancestors or different species that have been around that we've interbred or mated with, but are no longer here. For example, the tribes, the indigenous people of New Zealand are showing in their DNA that there is an unknown DNA in there of large proportions, showing that there was another species that they interbred with that no longer exists now on this planet. And in the work of David Reich, he also has shown that ghost ancestors in around 19% of the population, there is another species that is coming up in our DNA and showing that they used to be here, but they're no longer here now. So that's already showing us quite a few different species that have been on the planet. If you look at the research of my book as well, you can also see that humans have also mated or interbred with the Sasquatch in reference to the Almasty, which is the Sasquatch of Russia. So again, you can see that the human DNA is possibly quite a wide pool. We seem to have interbred with quite a variety of different species. And the Rh negative bloodline or blood type is possibly another different species as well, which has managed to stay and remain in our bloodline because it was in large proportions to begin with, which we'll come back to in a minute. So number 3, all humans are said to be 99.9% identical to each other. But how can we be identical to a species that contains a completely different blood type that is not compatible? And this is, in fact, based on only really a few thousand volunteers compared to the 8 billion people in the world today. So we can see that there's a lot more to our genes and our genetic material than we currently understand. Number 4, there are a large amount of Rh negative people who are red-headed, indicating that there's some sort of link here. In fact, no one knows where red hair comes from either. It just appeared between 20 to 100,000 years ago, depending on what you look at. But there is also more than one gene for red hair as well, indicating multiple sources. The Neanderthal is also supposed to have had red hair, or at least they had the red hair gene, but it's a different gene to the one that we have in the world today. Another red hair gene pops up around Finland, but again, it's a different gene to the one that we have in the world today, indicating that there have been multiple sources of this red hair. Number 5, before people were forced to migrate en masse due to war, famine, and genocide, the British Isles held the most amount of red-haired people. Of those red-haired people, Scotland and Ireland house the most amounts of Rh negative blood type. So this is showing us, again, the red hair, the Rh negative, there are many more people who used to have this, and they seem to be centered around certain regions or pockets in the world. And it's interesting that the British Isles have this, because I've always felt that the British people were actually a very interesting type of person. And there is some research to show that maybe the British people are actually one or all of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, which again would be interesting because Israel is obviously Middle East, Mesopotamia, where this unknown DNA originated from. They then move up to the British Isles. And I've always found it astounding that the British Isles had so much power in the world when they're just this tiny island compared to all these other different continents around the place. You know, how did they become so successful? How was the Queen so successful in the world? She is said to have been the heads of the Committee of 300, and these were the 300 men who actually ruled the world. But the Queen was the head of that. How did she get so much power? How was she so important in the world? Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. So first of all, let's look at the Basque. This is another area where there's a huge amount of Rh negative people in the world, and in some areas, even more than 50%. They also, interestingly, have elongated skulls. And again, no one knows where the Basque people came from. But when you look at their culture and the language that they use, there seems to be something reminiscent of South America. And South America is an area where elongated skulls were also found. And also many giants as well with red hair were discovered in North America. In fact, thousands and thousands of them have been discovered. Again, that red hair link and the elongated skull link there. Although the elongated skulls that have been discovered in Peru that are being studied by the Mexican universities and also the laboratory of Dr. Nassim Harami have now been identified as having come from the Black Sea, the Middle East, this area. Again, this area of unknown DNA, this area where civilization is said to have begun. So Eridu was seen as the first city. That is now Iran. You only have to look at the Middle East to see that all the warring and fighting that's been going on there. And it really begs the question, why is there so much unrest? Why is there so much fighting? They were supposed to have found Gilgamesh's tomb, and the second that they found this, another war broke out. There was another time when a Stargate was discovered, and again, a war broke out. The Americans came in, apparently airlifted it out. I suspect that there are many Stargates all around the Earth. I suspect that there are many portals all around the Earth. And again, it's cementing this off-planet link that we seem to have. And I feel that the Rh negative bloodline or blood type is a huge part of that. So also Saudi Arabia and Morocco are also areas where they have large amounts of Rh negative bloodline. Again, the Middle East. Another area is Norway, and Norway is just over the channel from Scotland, but it's also bordering Russia. And Russia is another one of those areas where unknown DNA has been found. And the original Russians, or the Slavs, have been of huge interest to certain geneticists who want to try and understand more about this DNA and where it comes from. In my book, I talk about the link between the Tau Cetis, and the Tau Cetis were described as being tall, red-haired or red blonde-haired, and being the original Slavs. So if this is the case, there's that off-planet link there as well. Who knows? It's not something that I can prove, but I found it was an interesting connection, and that's why I decided to put it in my book and explore these different blood types. And, Rh negative is obviously a very more obvious bloodline or blood type that we can look at, which is why we're exploring it today. Now, number 7, interestingly, the Rh negative people also are said to have a different physiology. They're said to have an extra vertebrae in their spine, and they often have very low blood pressure, which is something that doctors haven't quite understood. So again, this is pointing to the fact that they are a different species, maybe a sister species, but they're a different species. Number 8, the royal families in Europe not only seem to have a lot of red hair, but they are also said to have a lot of Rh negative blood as well, which is very interesting. So again, this links to the British Isles. It also links us to the Tuatha De Danann people, who are red blonde haired, that's sort of strawberry blonde hair, and they are now said to be living under the land, under the ground in Ireland. And that links to the Agarthians, the Telosi, and these were supposed to come from Alpha Centauri. So again, that link. And we're always finding this link between our planet and other planets as well. And I think it's fair to assume that we are most likely not the only people living in this galaxy. And I think it's just a matter of just opening up our minds to this and, and maybe seeing that extraterrestrials are nothing more than just us. We didn't come from this planet. We also came from elsewhere as well. Number 9, the Rh negative blood type is recessive, meaning that it should have worked its way out of our system by now, but it hasn't. And the fact that it hasn't means that at once upon a time, there were a lot more Rh negative people living on this planet than there are now. Only 7% of the world's population now are Rh negative. This also shows us that Rh negative isn't a mutation and hasn't come about through adaptation of our species. The red hair gene is the same, and it's also recessive. But 40% of the population have the marker for red hair, meaning that, we had a lot more red-headed people around. Now it's only 1%. So how has this changed so much in our world? Where have all these people gone? Number 10, Asia has the lowest amounts of Rh negative blood, with some parts having none at all. The areas around Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and Indonesia are the same areas where the ancient continent of Lemuria was supposed to be. In fact, the Indonesian islands are said to be the mountaintops of Lemuria, which sank under the ocean at the same time that Atlantis was supposed to have sunk as well, or maybe a little bit earlier, in fact. But it's interesting that these islands and this continent of Lemuria didn't have this gene. And the reason why it's interesting is because there is an idea that this blood type, the Rh negative blood type, is actually an Anunnaki blood type. The Anunnaki are people who are said to be the sky gods. They're the people that came to Earth from the sky, and they not only kick-started civilization again in the Middle East after the Great Flood, but they're also supposed to be responsible for creating or genetically altering the human race, at least one bloodline of it anyway. These Anunnaki were often called the Atlanteans because they were supposed to have set up this Atlantean or Atlantis advanced civilization as well, which is said to have run for millions of years. It ran alongside Lemuria, but it housed a very different type of person to Atlantis. The Lemurians were more spiritually based, but the Atlanteans were more technologically based. And actually, looking at our world now, we're having this same issue, that we're trying to become more technologically advanced before gaining more spiritual advancement first. And I suspect that the two need to go hand in hand in order for civilizations to move to that next level of their civilization. moving from a type 0 civilization to a type 1, for example. This is possibly why Atlantis fell. It's possibly why Lemuria was wiped out. Maybe the Atlanteans wiped out the Lemurians. I suspect that they possibly had direct energy weapons back then. The Atlanteans fell because they were so technologically advanced that they possibly blew themselves up, or possibly they just were not able to evolve to that next level of the human species because they were too mind-based and not enough heart-based. I talk about this a lot in my book and in my episodes, as you already know. But it's interesting that this Lemuria did not have the Rh negative blood type, and we've got the Atlantean colonies. And then when Atlantis fell, obviously that there are many different survivors, and they went off into other parts of the world. In particular, the Atlanteans moved into Egypt, which is in that same area. So I find this very interesting, and it seems to go some way of confirming that the Atlanteans maybe housed the Rh negative blood type, and maybe this is where we can see the Anunnaki blood type in practice as well. Researcher and author Matthew Lacroix also has an interesting theory, and says that at one point we all used to be Rh negative and highly spiritual beings, but the addition of the rhesus monkey DNA into our species changed our blood type to Rh positive, taking away our spiritual abilities and dumbing us down as a species. This is said to have been done by the Anunnaki or Atlanteans, who tried out many experiments on the original inhabitants of the earth, the indigenous people, and used them as their worker species when their worker species went on strike and refused to work anymore. As the Mayan Popol Vuh also confirms, they altered the DNA of humans multiple times, eventually culminating in the Homo sapien of today. Certainly, our DNA does show a lot of genetic changes, many of which geneticists cannot explain, and also shows intelligent design. But my personal belief is that we are not one species, but several species, with many researchers saying that we're 5 or 6 different species, which, as I've outlined before, is most likely. But there are also others that talk about us housing the genetics of extraterrestrial species as well. In particular, the late Army Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, who was given access to top secret files that show that we contain DNA from a combination of at least 12 different species of extraterrestrial in varying amounts. Now, when you consider the field of epigenetics, I find this quite incredible, because epigenetics not only shows that trauma or memories are passed down in our DNA, but it also means that if we have the DNA of 12 different species, what type of memories are we getting? What type of memories are in there? Are there memories of planets exploding? Are there memories of different types of cultural practices? Are there memories of traveling around the cosmos? And also, what is space? I don't think space is what we've been told it is, and I don't think it even looks like, what we see when we look up at the night sky. I think this is a very different type of reality that we have on this planet for whatever reason. So we don't even know what space or extraterrestrials really are. And I think this is where we really, really need to have an open mind and start saying to ourselves, maybe we didn't originate from here. Maybe we are extraterrestrials ourselves. And maybe this is something that we need to explore in more detail in the ongoing hunt to find out who we are, where we came from, and where we're going next, which of course is what I talk about in my new book. Okay, so if you want to read or learn more about these sorts of topics, then you may enjoy my new book, Human Origins, the Multiverse, and Our Star Ancestry, and the link will be in the notes below. And on that, I will say good night or goodbye, and I will catch up with you again next week. All right, take care. Bye.